Well, hello. We're continuing on in our series as we just go through the book of Matthew chapter by chapter and see what it has for us, what we can discover through this teaching together. We've been in 3 chapters over the last few weeks from the Sermon on the Mount, talking about Jesus' teaching specifically, what he said to different people. And now we see in the Gospel of Matthew, it turns to some works, some deeds done by Jesus. And we want to see a little bit of what we have here. And what do you think as we sort of make this transition over? What are some things we want to pay attention to?
Yeah, as we look at these miracle stories, they're deeds, but most of them involve miracles of one kind or another. In each one of the stories, we get to see someone coming to Jesus with a need. It may be a spiritual need, a psychological need, a physical need, fear, and second, we see Jesus responding to that need in a powerful and meaningful way for them. In the process, we get to see Jesus' authority being highlighted over various aspects of human experience and even the natural world. So we'll be looking for ways in which Jesus expressed his authority. And of course, all along the way, we always need to be thinking about the question that Matthew has foremost in his mind, which is, who is this Jesus? He began by saying that Jesus is the Son of David, emphasizing that Jesus is the Messiah King. But it's real important for us to remember as we go through Matthew that Jesus wasn't just the new King of the Jews, like David or like Herod or something like that. Jesus is ushering in a new kingdom and a new kind of kingdom that involves not just Israelites, but all people.
All of us, yeah, all of us as we watch this and learn from it. Okay, so as we go through today, we'll be looking at a lot of different stories and actions Jesus takes, and we're always thinking, who is Jesus? What does this mean for me? So we'll start off with verses 1 through 4. We see Jesus heals someone. What do we see here? Who's the person? What's the need he has?
Yeah, well, first of all, the man is Jewish, and secondly, he's a man. And that's important because some of the people Jesus heals in this chapter are not Jews, they're Gentiles, and they're not all men, some are women. So we have a Jewish man. This man is a social outcast because he has a disease that Matthew calls leprosy. Okay. Now what we've learned is that leprosy is a very, very specific disease, and the New Testament writers appear to use that term for any serious chronic skin condition, skin disease, whether it's technically leprosy or not. So some of our modern translations don't use the word leprosy there. They'll just say something like skin disease or something like that. But it's still a very, very serious thing. And all skin diseases were lumped into this category of leprosy, which had a pretty terrible impact on the life of the person suffering from it, right?
That makes sense, yeah. We'll see. If you're reading along with our plan this week, you would be reading in Leviticus 13. And that passage talks a lot about just any skin disease, so it's cool to make that connection a little bit. And people who had a skin disease, they would wear torn clothes, their hair would be unkempt, they'd have to live alone, and not only alone, but alone outside of the camp, away from people. So it's pretty astounding to see this person's here, he sees Jesus, and that Jesus goes to him, he touches him, and that would be a pretty shocking thing for the people around to witness and be a part of.
Yeah, this guy is totally unclean in every possible way. Like you talked about, the social isolation, no touching, he can't be around his family, he can't even live in the village. That would have meant he couldn't pursue his occupation, so there's an economic factor going on here. And he wouldn't be allowed to go to the synagogue or to the temple for worship.
Couldn't worship, wow.
Had religious implications. So this skin disease called leprosy here had terrible, debilitating implications for every aspect of this man's life. And you're right, to touch him rendered you unclean, and yet Jesus has no hesitation to moving beyond all of that isolation that had been created by the law, and touching and healing this guy. Yeah. In the course of this, we see Jesus' authority over disease, and in this case, terrible, debilitating physical disease. So that's real important.
Okay, yeah, and we see that he is cleansed, and then it says for him to go to the priest. But it is interesting here that it says, "See that you say nothing to anyone." So then that can be something we're thinking, not what's the point? We're glad he's clean. We're glad that he's healed, but that seems surprising when we meet Jesus that he would say that. So can you tell us more about why that might happen?
Yeah, Matthew makes quite a point of the fact that Jesus frequently said that. It's not quoted at the end of every miracle, but it's there frequently. And the Gospel of Mark also has a lot of places where it reminds us that Jesus told the person who was healed not to discuss it widely. There are a number of different theories about why Jesus may have done that. The explanation that makes the most sense to me is this. As important as healing was in the ministry of Jesus to demonstrate his authority and his identity, it wasn't the main reason why Jesus came.
Yeah.
Even though when Matthew summarizes the ministry of Jesus, he says Jesus was teaching and preaching and healing. So it was very important in Jesus' ministry, but it was not the main priority, the main purpose. And Matthew is slowly making his way toward what that ultimate purpose was. And we know what it is because we know the end of the story. It's the cross. Mm-hmm. So I think Jesus did not want people to say, oh, he's the Messiah on the basis of his miraculous powers.
Okay.
Because ultimately, Jesus' identity as the Messiah, the Savior, is going to be based on his self-sacrificial death and his victorious resurrection, not on his healing miracles.
So that's not what he's leading with, in a sense. That's not the whole reason. Okay, wow. So much just in those first 4 verses that we discover.
Okay.
Then we can go down to the next chunk of verses. That's verses 5 through 13. And we see here, you said we're looking at a lot of miracle stories. So we're looking for the person, the need, and response from Jesus. Why don't you start us off with that?
Yeah, well, this person couldn't be more different. Number one, well, he is a man, but he's a Gentile, not a Jew. And he's an enemy Gentile, as it were. He's a centurion, which is an important officer rank in the Roman army. So he is in the army of the oppressors who have come in and subjugated Jesus' homeland. And he would have been a much hated and feared person. And yet he comes to Jesus. And the fascinating, Jesus is back in Capernaum now, where he made his kind of the headquarters of his Galilean ministry. And maybe the centurion was stationed there as well, because as we discussed, Capernaum is a place where a number of important roads crossed. At any rate, he comes to Jesus and asks for Jesus to heal his servant who is suffering from some kind of paralysis. The word there could refer to a servant or more likely a slave.
Okay.
And so the slave is probably also a Gentile, somebody that he's brought with him from Italy or wherever he was stationed before. So that's the need, the illness, the paralysis of his servant, slave. And he comes to Jesus with an amazing confidence in Jesus' ability to heal his servant. And Jesus recognizes this. He says, I haven't found faith like yours anywhere in Israel, and I'm going to heal your servant according to your faith. And this, he's speaking to a Gentile and to a centurion. So the identity of this person is really important in showing Matthew's effort to tell us that Jesus did come as the true king in the tradition of David for the Israelite people, but that his kingdom was extended to all. Yeah. So it's he doesn't touch in this healing, but he does just speak the word, let it be done. Let it be done.
I love the humility we see there too, that it's someone who he talks about how he has authority. He's able to command other authority, the centurion, but he goes to Jesus recognizing that, I can't boss you around. You have the authority. So for him to even ascribe that to Jesus that's really powerful and convicting for us to
good point.
think through.
He recognizes that Jesus has a superior authority to his military authority. It's much broader.
It's a very different authority.
This quote here in verse 11, I tell you, Jesus says, many will come from east and west and will take their places at the banquet with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's a very important statement. This people coming from east and west is a reference to Gentiles who are coming to God. And it says, will sit at the banquet with the great forebears of the Israelite people, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who were the covenant bearers. They were the keepers of God's covenant with Israel. And so what Jesus is saying here is that Gentiles, like this centurion and like this slave, are welcomed into the covenant people of God.
Wow, we're seeing that happen before their very eyes in that setting. Okay,
very important.
That's another powerful miracle. So then it goes on to where Jesus heals Peter's mother-in-law and some others as well. So we're now jumping to verses 14 through 17. So again, looking for the person, the need, and response to Jesus.
Well, we're back to a Jewish person,
Okay.
Peter's mother-in-law, but obviously a woman. And we're still in the town of Capernaum, where Peter's family appears to be living. And there's also a mention here about a broad ministry of Jesus in the area, healing sick people and dealing with demon possession. The specific miracle is a reference to a fever that this woman had, which is not to be taken lightly. It's signs of an infection of some kind, and in that culture, an infection could be deadly. So he takes this very seriously. And we see here Jesus exercising authority both over physical illness and over spiritual possession. He goes back to his habit of touching the person that he's healing. It says he touched her hand and she was healed. This little healing story also includes one of Matthew's many prophetic statements to show that Jesus, that every aspect of Jesus' life was a fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy. And here it's a reference to his healing ministry. So the quote appears in chapter 8, verse 17. It comes from Isaiah chapter 53, verses 4 and 5. He took our infirmities and bore our diseases. It's a direct quote from Isaiah.
That Jesus has power over that, over every aspect of who we are.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we jump down to verses 18 through 22, and this talks about discipleship a little bit more.
Yeah, this is kind of a break in this series of miracle stories that is mostly what we find in chapter 8. But he pauses here to talk about a man who had come to follow Jesus. Jesus had a number of, the crowds followed Jesus to listen to his teaching, but then some people, we've already met Peter and Andrew and James and John, who seem to have followed Jesus day by day as his close disciples. Seems like this scribe, a Jewish teacher, recognizes the authority of Jesus' teaching, even over his own, and wants to follow Jesus. So this is an important moment. And this is an interesting reminder that even though this is a chapter full of miracle stories, in the background of all of these are two really important factors. You brought one of them out about the identity of Jesus, right? Yeah. But the other one is, so not only who is Jesus and what was Jesus like, but who are his disciples and what should they be like?
What should they be doing? How should they act?
Yeah, exactly. So this issue is kind of lurking in the background, and it pops up here in verse 18 and following. It's interesting that this scribe comes, I will follow you wherever you go. Wow, that's what a disciple should be
It's a strong
saying.
statement, yeah.
That's exactly what a disciple should do. But Jesus very quickly says, okay, that's good. I just want you to know there is a cost to discipleship. He uses the analogy of the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. That's in verse 20. And I think that suggests a whole world of things in the reality that was Jesus' life. Not only does he not have a settled home, he doesn't have a settled family life, doesn't have a settled occupation. He has left his family back in Nazareth. He's left his job as a carpenter back in Nazareth. He's left whatever stability he had there and is now kind of an itinerant preacher and healer, and says, if you're going to really follow me, then you need to know that that's the kind of life you're signing up for. So we kind of put that in the category of the cost of discipleship. The scribe says, oh, well, that sounds good to me. Let me first go and bury my father. That doesn't mean that his father is lying dead back at the house waiting for a hole to be dug. What it means is, let me go and wait till my father has died so I don't have him to care for or to work with anymore, and then I'll come and prioritize you.
Okay.
And Jesus seems to imply, no, I need to be your priority right now if you're going to be a follower, which is a pretty good reminder to us as well.
Jesus changes our priorities.
Yeah,
That's the effect he has.
Yeah. So little note about discipleship and following Jesus.
Wow, yeah, that's pretty compelling for us to be reminded of that. That's especially in the middle of all these miracle stories. I think it's interesting too that if Jesus is grabbing people's attention, they're excited to see what he's capable of, but that it's not for personal gain, or it's not meant for when it's convenient, when we need it, but that we would follow Jesus closely, and wherever that takes us, that he would be our priority. So we continue on, and we come back to another miracle story after that. So we're here where Jesus calms the sea. So now in chapter 8, verses 23 through 27. So who are the people involved in this one?
Yeah, it's interesting. Jesus does come back to this string of miracle stories in chapter 8, but he comes back to one that involves his disciples.
So it's still related to discipleship there.
Related to that disciple issue that we just talked about. So these are the disciples. They've been crisscrossing the Sea of Galilee, and this time the need is for safety in a storm that has come up on the water there. And there's another storm too, and that's in the minds of the disciples.
They're terrified.
They are terrified, and so
we're perishing. It says,
There are two storms here. One is a natural disaster, and one is an emotional disaster that we may have felt too. Fear in difficult circumstances. The area where we live just suffered a rare hurricane that doesn't usually strike our area, and it was a fearsome thing.
It reminds us of how much we can be afraid of that. I think sometimes in this day and age we forget how scary that would be, and you think of the different technology they would have had, whatever situation their boat might have had as well, that a storm is terrifying, and it's still something that we're afraid of today.
And these are professional fishermen, at least 4 of them.
Yeah, so they're somewhat used to the idea of storms.
They know how to handle a boat, and they've been in storms before. This must have been a fierce one for them to be so terrified as they were. When Jesus is awakened by these fearful followers, he says something quite striking. Why are you afraid, O you of little faith? And that is really striking, not just in and of itself, but in contrast to just a couple of stories earlier in this very chapter where the centurion was commended by Jesus for being a person of great faith, and he was a Gentile, a pagan, and here Jesus' own followers he is criticizing because they don't seem to have exhibited the kind of faith that he thought they should have in that circumstance. So it says he rebuked the wind. That's the same word that's used of what Jesus did to demons.
Okay, wow.
He rebuked demons and told them, "Be gone." And here he's kind of treating this wind almost like it's a demonic thing, and he rebukes the wind. So here we see Jesus' authority over the natural world.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jesus has strength over everything, that
Yeah.
included, that he's
Yeah.
able to calm that
Oh,
storm.
and did you notice the question that comes at the very end in verse 27?
What sort of man is this? Who is this? I can't imagine, especially sleeping during the storm. He wakes up and rebukes it, and they're wondering, who is this person that we've been following? So, what do we discover as they ask that? What do you think it says to us about who Jesus is?
Well, it affirms what you were saying earlier, that underneath, the current running underneath all of these stories is the question, who is Jesus? And that's the question that they kind of literally ask. And that's the question these miracle stories should engender in our minds. That is not just, whoa, look at Jesus' power. Look, he could do this, he could do that. So who is this? This Messiah King, this Son of David, this Son of God. And so that's a very important question here that the disciples are starting to catch on to. That they shouldn't just be wowed at the miraculous powers of Jesus, but they should be focused in on what it tells them about his identity.
Yeah, they're not just to applaud it, but what does that mean for them? Yeah. And then we come to another miracle story as well. And this one, I think, can be a bit jarring and odd to read. We're talking about demons, we're talking about pigs and all sorts of different things. So, where do we want to start even as we take a look at this passage?
This one is way outside of our experience.
Yeah.
It starts with demonic possession and ends with drowned pigs. So it's a bizarre story. It's very important to notice that they have now crossed from the Capernaum area, which is on the west side of the Sea of Galilee, northwest, over, it says, to the other side, which puts it on the east side of the Sea of Galilee. And it calls it the region of the Gadarenes. That area had a name. It was called Decapolis, and you can tell from that word, Deca, 10, polis, cities, and those are Greek words. This is Greek territory. It's Gentile.
So we're back with,
we're back among Gentiles here. And what we see is Jesus' encounter to two men. So they're Gentile men living in this region of the Decapolis near the town of Gadara, who are demon-possessed. And they are kind of like that leper, that Jewish man who had a skin disease, in that every aspect of their life rendered them outcast. We talked about the social, the economic, the religious, the personal implications for that leprosy situation. The same thing is true here, just like the leper had to live outside the camp. You were reading from Leviticus there. We got the same thing here. He's unclean to the Jewish mind because he's a Gentile. They are Gentiles. They are demon-possessed, obviously unclean. And now they're living out in the tombs among dead bodies. That rendered, in the Jewish mind, a way to be unclean.
Wow.
But he, I keep saying he.
Both of them, yes.
I'll tell you why I keep saying he.
Okay.
Because in the Gospel of Mark, it only mentions one of these.
Okay.
But Matthew tells us there were two of them.
Okay.
So pardon that.
That's okay.
They greet Jesus with a question, but look at what they call him. What do you have to do with us? This is the demon-controlled men in the tombs, Son of God.
Wow, yeah.
So they use a very powerful title for Jesus. Now the question is, what would they have thought about? What would they have meant when they used that phrase, Son of God? We think of that as a kind of a Jewish concept, maybe, people who already believe in the one true God. But Gentiles use that term as well. When they used it, they meant one of two kinds of people. Either the emperor himself, who was called Son of God, or one of the heroes of their mythology.
Okay.
Hercules is the famous one, but there were others as well. And so they used this phrase "Son of God" to mean someone who had great power, either political power like the emperor or physical power like Hercules.
So they're noticing Jesus' power.
Yeah,
right here. Okay.
yeah. So they don't really understand him as Son of God in the.
It's not like the God of the
Yeah,
universe.
right,
Okay.
right. But they do as you say, they recognize his power. These social outcasts.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then Jesus responds and he says to them, "Go." That's that we see from there how he responds to that right there. Anything that we want to notice as we look at this response, and they do come out, they go right into the pigs and run off into the sea and drown. So that's where it feels like an already kind of weird story gets weirder, and we're just thinking, what do we do with this?
A couple things. Do we have time to talk about the pigs?
Yes, I think we do.
Okay.
Yeah. Tell us about the pigs, because it is such a head scratcher, I think, in our context these days.
Well, we need to start with what Jewish people believed about demons.
Okay.
For one thing, they believed that evil spirits, demons, could only exist possessing some other body.
Okay.
They couldn't be free floating.
So first it's those two
evil
human
spirits.
beings. Okay.
First they're in the two human beings, and then when they're exorcised, expelled from those human beings, they immediately take up residence in some other beings, in this case, the nearby herd of pigs. You can tell we're in Gentile territory, right? Because they're pig farmers.
Yeah, that they would have pigs, because the Jews wouldn't, because they're not clean. Okay.
Exactly. So anyway, the first thing to need to know is the Jews thought demons, evil spirits, had to exist in some other body. Second thing is they believed that demons could only exist in really dry places, not in water, over the water, on the water, or whatever.
Fascinating.
I'm not sure where these concepts came from, and I can't confirm them. I'm just saying that's what they thought.
Okay.
And that would explain then this whole drowning thing. They thought they were safe in the bodies of these pigs,
Until
but then
they
the
went in the
pigs
water.
stampeded into the water,
Okay.
and that would have been the
Interesting.
end of
Okay.
that.
That's helpful to
So
know. Yeah.
that seems to be what's going on here with the whole pig thing. The story, though, ends on a very important note that there's no question about. In verse 34, then the whole town, and remember these are Gentiles, pagans, came out to meet Jesus. When they saw him, they begged him to leave their region. And so they're afraid of Jesus. And I don't really blame them, because, I mean, it would have been nice if they invited him to stay and explained to them who he was and all that kind of stuff. But they were already afraid of the demons and the demon-possessed men. That's why they drove them out into the cemetery.
Okay, yeah.
Now they have confronted someone who has more power and more authority than the demons did.
Wow.
And so they're even more afraid of him. And they said, whoa, we can't handle all this power. You're going to have to leave here. But I think that's interesting, even though he has to leave, that these Gentiles recognize the incredible authority of Jesus.
They saw the power on display. Okay. Yeah, for them to recognize that. And we see a lot of recognition of that over all of these passages. Sort of as we summarize this, we see, what did Jesus have authority over? And I love, it's so helpful for you to explain that title, Son of God, the way that they saw his power and they sort of acknowledged it in human terms of what that looked like. What else do we see that Jesus had authority over as we finish up for this chapter?
Yeah, well, we can just summarize the stories that we've just looked at. Jesus demonstrated power over the natural world with that stilling of the storm, over the spirit world with the expulsion of demons, and over the human world, illness, disease, and I'll add fear.
Okay.
That's a human condition, right? Yeah. So Jesus demonstrated authority over all of those areas of human existence.
Okay. way.
Yeah.
And we notice that Jesus ministers to so many different people. I love how you took time to point out in every single story, who was it? We see men and women, and we see Jews and Gentiles in different positions in society. Is there anything else you'd like to add there for how we summarize just who Jesus ministers to?
No, it just reminds us that Matthew really cares about this. He starts out sounding so Jewish. Jesus is the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. But we barely get Jesus born, and we've got Magi visiting from a foreign country. They're Gentiles. So everybody is attracted to Jesus. And here we see Jesus reaching out to all kinds of people, from Roman authority figures like the centurion down to social outcasts like lepers and demon-possessed people.
It really covers everyone.
Yeah.
And I hope we can find bits of ourselves maybe in that story, even though it can be hard. You've done such a fantastic job. It's been cool to kind of peek behind the curtain and understand a little bit more of, okay, what does it mean to be a leper? What does it mean to be a centurion? What is it? We don't always think through those things very clearly. It's not our context, but that maybe we can think of ourselves in, well, I might relate to that person in this way or this person in another way, and that we kind of fit into the gospel story of who Jesus can minister to, who Jesus does minister to, and that's everyone, so that we're all in this story in a way. And I love those themes too that we've noticed of how it's mostly miracle stories, but in the middle of that we do see some stuff about discipleship, that we see the 12 with Jesus and how they respond. We see how the scribe was treated, how Jesus responded to him when he said, let me wait a little bit, and to understand what does it look like for us as followers of Jesus. How do we want to follow him? Do you have anything you'd like to add about discipleship there?
You've done a good job setting this up. The idea of following is still very central here, and yet Jesus is honest that following comes out of situations that we find very fearful, and following also demands recognition that discipleship has a cost. If we're going to follow Jesus, he happens to be on the path to a cross. And
that's where we're headed.
So it's a hard road.
I think that's a great note for us to wrap up on as we think through. Most of you watching this, probably you might describe yourself as a disciple, as a follower of Jesus. And if that is you, what do these stories say to you about where is God calling you to continue to follow? What does that look like? You used the word priority before, and I just love that to think through. This isn't something we just do for fun. We study the Bible, we read about it and move on, but that we really recognize that Jesus is meant to be our central priority. So maybe this week hold up your priorities before God and see what that looks like. Are your priorities under Jesus, or are you putting other things above Jesus in this time? There's so many good things here as we continue to seek to find out who Jesus is and what does that mean to us. And I hope you'll ask yourself this week, what does that mean to you? We hope you'll come back next week as we continue on in the book of Matthew.